Acknowledging the existence of the term of other gods. We found out that God, the word term God there is Elohim, which doesn't mean they are creator gods, but it is a position, or it is a position of authority. For example, the Bible tells us that Satan became the god of this world, right? So we know he's not the creator, but he became. So that shows you he came into the office or into the position of God in this world, which he took from Adam, because Adam committed high treason when Adam was the one who was commissioned to be large and in charge of the planet, right? All right, so in the book of Exodus chapter 12, verse 12, we see that when God was fighting Pharaoh, we see not only was he fighting Pharaoh in Egypt, but he was also fighting the other gods. What we're not told in the scriptures is what are the other gods that God was taking on. So this is why we're calling it Battle of the Gods and so forth, because I want you to see that every one of the 10 plagues, what we call the 10 plagues of Egypt, every one of the 10 plagues was directed at a certain god or goddess that the Egyptians used to worship. So basically what God was doing, he was just laying the smackdown. Can I use that? He was just laying the smackdown on these other gods. And so we're going to go ahead and pick up. We talked about some of the other gods already. We're to cover two of them. So we're going to pick up on the third one. And if we're just going to dive right in. And the third plague, if anybody remembers, this was a bug invasion. Okay? Everybody say bugs. Yeah, creepy crawlies, water bugs, roaches. Let's find out. Now, so the third plague was a bug invasion, and this was against the Egyptian gods. There was two of them. Here God is taking on two gods at one time. One of them was Geb, okay, which was the god of the dust of the earth. We got to remember that God spoke to the dust of the earth, and some critters came forth. I'm going to cover that, and I'm going to challenge your theology in that, of course. And then the other god that took on was a goddess or a god called Khepri. Now, Khepri was a scarab. A scarab is a beetle. But when you look at the pictures of the Khepri and so forth, it had a beetle's face, but it had a fly antenna. And so it was literally a bug of God. That's one ugly mug right there too, man. I don't know about you, but so it was a bug god, a scarab. Have you ever seen the Egyptians where it has all those beetles? That's a reference to those gods, okay? But it had the head of a fly. So what God was doing is he was taking on these gods because this god was also known as a creator god. Now, let me tell you something a little bit about Khepri. Khepri was taken after what's called the dung beetle. Everybody know what dung is, right? Okay, lepupu, if you don't know what dung is. The Egyptians used to believe that Khepri was the one who rolled or pushed the sun across the sky. Just like the Greeks used to believe that Apollo used to take the sun and drive it across the sky during the day. So the way that the Egyptians came up with this belief that the scarab god did this is because they literally watched a dung beetle roll from one place to another, a small round turd. I'm telling you the truth. So this beetle would roll the small round piece of bookie, whatever you want to call it. I'm trying to say it in a nice way. I don't know how you can say it. So, and so from that idea, I don't know if they were smoking peyote in the desert or what was going on, but from that idea, they thought, well, this is one of the gods because he's rolling the sun across the land and so forth. So this is where the Egyptians actually came up with the idea and so forth. So let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 8, verse 16. That just shows you the dangers of living in a hot desert sun. You come up with anything, okay? Now, so in response, what God did on taking on these two gods, okay, in the book of Exodus, let me show you how he's going against God. Remember, the premise is in Exodus chapter 12, verse 12, God was fighting Pharaoh, Egypt, and the gods, all right? And so every plague is directed towards an Egyptian god. We're just not told which one's in the scriptures. Now, notice this. And the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, okay, stretch forth thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become what? Lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, some theologians, and I kind of agree with them, agreed that this is the first time that lice had ever come across the face of the planet. Lice had not existed then, so I'll give you a scripture. You draw your own conclusion for that. Another translation. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth. Remember, one of the gods, Geb, was the god of the dust of the creatures and so forth. Okay? So smote the dust of the earth, and it became what? Lice in man and in beast, and dust of the land became lice throughout the land of Egypt. Now, let's look at it from the King James Version. Let's move on to the next verse 18. And the magicians. Now, on your notes right there, would you please write beforehand, before I even say it, just write down, you can't get dumber than this. Because you need to see this. And the magicians did so, okay, with their enchantments. Now, God just created lice in man and beast. Now, everybody's like this, scratching themselves because they got lice everywhere, and stuff like that. And that's not enough. So the magicians, they thought, well, that ain't no big deal. We can do that too. So they not only added more trouble to themselves, look at this. And the magicians, remember the Bible tells us that, it doesn't say that magic isn't real, because we know from the book of Enoch that the magicians or magic was taught by the fallen angels. If you remember that teaching and so forth, okay? So the magicians did the same thing. And the magicians did so with their enchantments and brought forth lice. And they could not, brought forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and beast. So it's saying that they tried, but they couldn't bring them forth, okay, upon man and beast. But they were willing to try to bring forth more lice. Does that make sense to you? Hey, we've got an infestation of bugs. I know. Let's use some magic and bring on even more. Hello? So what I want you to see, now it says they couldn't cause it to pass. So there was lice on man and beast, verse 19. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the what? Finger of God. Now, the reason they put finger of God, because in the book of Luke it says that God can cast out a devil by the finger of God. So it only takes a finger. I don't think it's this finger. I think it's the pinky finger. By the finger of God, okay, God casts out devils. So they said this is the finger. And this is the finger of God. And so Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he, what? Hearkened not unto them. Are you seeing this? As the Lord had said. So his heart is getting hardened, and he's getting mad now because the magicians couldn't do the same thing. But they were willing to bring on twice as many problems. And again, this attack right here was against the God who's in charge of the dust of the earth, and the one that's the scarab, the beetle-looking fly thing. Okay? Now, let's go to the book of Psalms, because it shows you a little bit more insight on these 10 plagues. Psalms chapter 78, verse 42. They remembered not, this is talking about the children of Israel, how they had forgotten how God brought them through the difficult times. It's much like Christians today. When we hit a crisis, we pray to God, God brings us through. The money came through, the medical report came through, whatever came through, and then 6 weeks later we're going through the same battle, and we forgot how God delivered us the last time. Okay? So we're like the children of Israel in that capacity, and they remembered not they remembered not his hand and the day when he delivered them from the enemy. Now, how he had wrought his signs, everybody say God did it. And his wonders. So he did signs and wonders. Now, what's the difference between a sign and a wonder? A sign appeals to the intellect. A wonder appeals to the imagination. A sign is to the intellect. You're trying to figure it out. Okay? It's like when the Roman soldier looked at Jesus, and it says it grew dark for the space of 3 hours. And then what caused him to say, truly this was the Son of God? What caused him to say is because the Romans believed, when this unusual eclipse happened, that their god, Roma, would die. And so when that eclipse happened, the Romans believed that their god had died and a new one came onto the scene. That's a sign that appealed to the Roman soldier's intellect because he understood what that was. A wonder is when God does something and it's beyond your imagination. It's one of those things like, I don't know how he did it, but he did it. Turn to someone saying he's going to do it to you too. How he wrought his signs and his wonders, okay, in the field of Zoan, that's telling you exactly where. And he had turned the rivers into blood. Everybody say rivers into blood. And their floods, and they couldn't get a drink. Let's move on to the verse 45. Now here's an addition that's not given to us in the book of Exodus. And he sent divers sorts of flies among them. Okay? Which, what? Devoured them. This is not the locusts and frogs. It says it devoured them. This is not the locust plague. And frogs, okay? Which destroyed them. The word flies there is the Hebrew word arab, and it means mosquitoes. So not only was there a lice infestation, but there were also a mosquito infestation, which would make sense because, unlike in the movie, the river is probably still blood. They couldn't have anything to drink, and so there's blood everywhere. There's blood in the river. The Bible says there was blood in the cups and the utensils and their wells and so forth. So that's going to draw mosquitoes because they're what? Bloodsuckers. Right? Turn to somebody and say, so are lawyers. Just saying, well, thought I'd go there, okay? Now, so it also means mosquitoes, but then it says, in the King James, it says, there were also divers kinds of flies. The word divers means there were different kinds of flies. So not only does it mean that he sent lice upon the earth, this is why I call it a bug invasion, contrary to the movie, not only did he send lice upon the earth, but he also sent a mosquito infestation, and then divers kind of flies. So now you've got gnats, you've got mosquitoes, you've got flies, and all of these bug invasions is against the two gods that God was fighting with this plague. Geb, which was the god of the dust of the earth and so forth, and then the scarab god, okay, Kepri, with the head like a beetle and a head of a fly. So God was showing them, even though these people worship you, I'm the one who caused these things to come forth. If you're such a God, why don't you go ahead and do something about it? The magicians couldn't. And so it made Pharaoh mad that his gods were failing him. Now you got to understand what the intent of Jehovah God was. Jehovah God was creating a contempt for the false gods. Because as these Egyptians and so forth began to pray to these false gods, and remember we learned in Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 7, that where did the gods come from? Deuteronomy 32, 7 or 17, it says that these were the fallen angels who appeared as gods unto men and caused them to do blood sacrifices and worship them. So these false gods are simply angels. That's why I've been teaching that these gods is not a type of being like Jehovah God. These are simply a position of rank or authority. So we've got powers, principalities, rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. Satan is the god of this world. But Satan became a god of this world when Adam committed high treason and he turned his authority over to Satan, because Satan, or Lucifer, was actually a cherub. So he stole the rank. Does everybody see that? So these gods, all these gods they're just fallen angels and so forth. So God, Jehovah God, is taking on these gods, one or two at a time, male or female gods and goddesses, and we showed you the difference. Now, I don't understand why. I can never understand why they chose to be female gods, other than the fact that it was to entice men to worship them. Are y'all still with me? All right, turn to someone and say, I'm learning and he's burning. So what this was a 2-for-1 shot. God was taking on two gods at one time, and Pharaoh, it hardened his heart. He became even more upset. So the next one, now I want you to picture this. You've got gnats, you've got flies, you've got mosquitoes, everybody's scratching, there's a river of blood going on, there's nothing to drink, okay? Lice everywhere. Remember, the frogs are everywhere too, dead frogs. There's a stench that's coming up from Egypt. So if you've got blood, you've got bugs, you've got a stench, you've got dead frog carcasses, what does it attract? Flies. So the next plague that God initiated on was swarms of flies. Everybody say flies. So when it says in Psalms that there were divers flies, it wasn't necessarily fly like we would think. The word flies there simply means, different mosquitoes and insects and stuff. All right. So it literally was a bug invasion. If you're a child of the 50s and 60s, it was a beetle invasion. All right, let me not go there. Exodus chapter 8. I rebuke that spirit of Jerry off of me right now. Now notice this. I got a sneeze coming on. All right, let me see if I can get past it. Nope. You ever do? Okay. Alrighty then. There we go. It's one of those things you're holding on to. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, okay, in which my people dwelt, okay, that no swarms of flies shall be there. Now what's going on? God is telling Moses, he said, we've got two places. We've got Egypt, and then there was the slave quarters, which was called the land of Goshen. So when you hear us talking from time to time that God has a place of protection for you, symbolically that would be the land of Goshen. Because while all these plagues are going on with the rest of Egypt, this land of Goshen, where God's people are, they're not being touched. There was literally a wall where you could step from one good side of town to the bad side of town. You stepped out of the land of Goshen and into Egypt, and there it was. Now think about this. Think about the power of God. You've got a river turned to blood, okay? You've got flies, you've got insects, you've got swarms going on. All the stuff is happening. And then there literally is a line where the flies, the smell, the blood, and all that stuff could not cross. Amen. That is the power of God. Talking about living in a bubble. Are y'all still with me? All right, so let's find out what's going on here. All right, so there were everybody say swarms of flies. That be there. To the end that they mayest know that I am, everybody say he's the great I am, the Lord in the midst of the earth. And I will put a what? Division between my people and thy people. So there's literally, God is literally creating a barrier. Now you got to remember when the children of Egypt left, and when the children of Israel left Egypt, okay, there was a cloud by day and a fire by night that separated God's people from the Egyptians. There was literally a pillar of fire. Are y'all seeing this? So God knows how to keep us safe. Turn to someone and say, he's still large in charge. All right. And it says that tomorrow that this sign shall be. And the Lord did so. Everybody say he caused the plague to happen. And there came grievous swarms of flies into the what? Houses of Pharaoh. And notice this. And to his servants' houses. And into the land of Egypt. Okay. The land was corrupted by reason of the swarms of flies. What does the word corrupted mean? Okay. So these flies came in. There's dead frog bodies. What do flies do with dead bodies? Now they're laying eggs. Guess what those eggs produce? Okay, I'm trying to paint a terrible picture. You've got a bloody river. Out of that came these frogs. From these frogs, they were like 2 or 3 feet high deep, you know. It says there were frogs in their beds. There were frogs in their houses and so forth. Now you've got dead frog bodies everywhere. Okay, you've got the stench of the blood. You've got this mosquito infestation. Not only on top of the mosquitoes and the lice, everybody's scratching, everybody's itching. Now you've got flies everywhere. Flies are everywhere. You've got dead frog bodies. You've got the blood. They're laying their eggs in the frog bodies. Now in about a day or two, you've got these maggots coming up all over the land of Egypt. Now you've got lice, you've got flies, you've got mosquitoes, you've got maggots, you've got a stinking blood. Does everybody see what God is doing? Okay, I'm trying to paint a terrible picture. Because it's not anything like in the movie where it's just, oh yes, and the river turned to Kool-Aid, you know. No. It's not anything like that. And so now you've got this. Now, when it says it corrupted, what do flies do? They land on everything. So you didn't have a source of food without flies being on it or taking a bite of something. There's a maggot. Okay? Does everybody see this? I'm trying to paint a gross picture on purpose. Okay, so your food source is corrupted. You've got nothing to eat. You can't drink the water. Okay, because it doesn't say that one plague stopped and another one began. It was plague after plague after plague after plague. You can see the same thing happening in the book of Revelations. When the seven plagues are being released on earth, there'll be earthquakes and this and this. It doesn't say one will start and then and stop and then another one comes on. They build up in momentum as God demonstrates His power. And so now God is showing this God of the flies. Now in the Hebrew, the God of the flies is Beelzebub. Okay, that's God of the flies. And so in Egypt, okay, the God of the flies, I don't know how to pronounce the name. Uatet, okay, which is the lady of the marshes. So it almost sounds like you're trying to say a cuss word to me. You know, I'm not even going to go there. But a lady of the marshes. So you got to remember, along the Nile, there were reeds and so forth. There were different, marsh areas and so forth, which is where the flies dwell. And so God is showing this goddess here that, there's not a thing you can do. And these flies corrupted the whole land. There's nothing to eat now. Not only that, what is it doing to the cattle? It's eating them alive. Okay? What is it doing to your kids? You're trying to, the Bible tells us later on that it became so dark, you had to feel your way around. So now you can't see. You're breathing in flies. Okay? You're talking, flies go into your mouth. Flies are crawling your ear, and you're trying to sleep. Flies are everywhere. You've got this constant crawly, feely thing coming all over your body in the middle of the night while you're trying to sleep. God is literally wearing out the Egyptians. Okay? And these Egyptians are praying to their gods because the reason they used to pray, the Egyptians used to pray to the fly goddess, okay, was so to protect them from swarms of flies. And so now God is saying you can pray to these goddesses all they want to. There's not a thing they can do. Does everybody see this? Turn to someone and say, I don't want to go to Egypt. Okay? So, the creation of flies exposed the powerlessness of this goddess, okay, to keep insects away. They used to pray to this goddess to keep mosquitoes and gnats and all that. Couldn't do it. And so God is demonstrating my power, is greater than God, than any of these false gods. Now, are you still with me? Now, another reason God did that is because to the Egyptians, if you've ever studied their ancient culture, they were a very clean people. Cleanliness was a big thing with them. Well, you can't be clean when there's blood everywhere, frog bodies everywhere, where there's maggots now, there's lice now. Can you imagine trying to have a conversation with someone? So, how you been doing? Oh yeah. Are you getting this? All right, it's not anything like in the movie. All right. Now, what happens when you have a bunch of flies? Okay, leads you right into the next plague because it says it corrupted the whole land. Okay, now you have the killing off of the livestock in the book of Exodus, chapter 9. Is anybody learning anything? All right, verse 6. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow. He gave Moses instructions. And all the land and all the cattle of Egypt, say all, not just by the land of Goshen, everywhere. From one end of the border of Egypt all the way to the other. That's a big place at that time. Because Pharaoh had a lot of land. So from one end of the border to another, all the cattle of Egypt, what? Died. But of the cattle of the children of Israel, died not one. Why? They were living literally in a supernatural protective bubble. The land of Goshen. So people who are worried sometimes, the people who think they're going to go through the tribulation period, if you want to go through it, you're going to be living in the land of Goshen. If you want to be raptured according to your faith, so be it unto you. You decide how you want to believe in that theology. Okay? But I believe that God's wrath is not reserved for His children, and He always removes His people before He passes judgment. He did it with Noah. He did it with, many others. He did it with Nineveh. He gave Nineveh a chance, So many times over we see evidences of that. So now the flies infestation got so bad, there's nothing, the bugs, the lice and everything, They corrupted the land. Now there's nothing for the cattle to eat. Okay? And flies, they can't keep the flies off themselves. And so what do we have? Now God is killing off all the cattle. This was against the Egyptian goddess Hathor. Okay? Hathor was the goddess of love and protection. The goddess of love and protection. And so God has shown them, your goddess can't protect any of you from anything. Okay? And if you've seen any of the Egyptian hieroglyphics and so forth, this was literally a goddess who had the head of a cow. Okay? So if you talked ugly about her and say, oh, that old cow, you probably got zapped. But anyways, and so what happened is, this plague showed that she was totally powerless. She could not, if she was the goddess of love and protection, she could not protect the livestock. She could not protect the living. Okay? What's necessity? She could not protect the cattle, which is a necessity for food and everything else. She couldn't do it. And so what does that do to the Egyptians? It causes them to have doubt. It causes them to, realize, oh wait, our gods and goddesses are no good. Now, why am I telling you this? Because when you read about the Exodus, if you're paying attention, it says when the children of Israel left Egypt, it says many of the Egyptians and strangers amongst them went with the children of Israel. Right? I would too. Wouldn't you? I ain't staying here. I walked to the edge, land of Goshen. They're doing fine. There's no bugs, no this, no that. Hello, somebody. All right. Let's go to plague number 6. Is anybody learning? All right. So, the next plague is boils and blisters. Oh. Everybody say boils and blisters. All right. So let me paint a picture. Here we go. Remember that painter that was on TV with the big fro? All right. Here's our bloody river. Here's our frog. Dead frogs croak, in case you didn't know. All right. You've got lice everywhere. You're scratching. You've got insects, mosquitoes, flies. Now you've got dead cows. The flies are having a heyday. You've got literally little mounds of maggots just growing as the fly carcasses are going on and so forth. And so now it's a war-torn area, and it's sickness and disease running rampant. And so now it says that these guys started getting boils and blisters. Okay, the King James Version for that is called a blame. A blame would be a blister and so forth. Now, if you got a blister and you're constantly scratching and so forth, it's going to seep. Now, guess what kind of insect is attracted to that? All right. So now you are literally a fly strip attracting all these bugs and stuff. So let's look a little bit deeper. Can you imagine trying to sleep at night? Even if you rolled up in something, there's probably a frog in your blanket or, some bugs and stuff like that. Turn to somebody and say, we're having a really gross service tonight. All right, so in Exodus chapter 9, verse 8 and 9. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, remember Moses was using the excuse that he shouldn't be called into the ministry because he wasn't qualified to talk good. And God said, well, I'm overlooking your disqualification. Your excuse doesn't work for me. If you don't want to talk, I'll send you someone to talk for you. Translation, those of you who are trying to give God excuses because you don't feel qualified, that's just too bad. He doesn't change his mind. His gifts and callings are without repentance. You might as well get busy. Well, somebody. All right. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, okay, take to you handfuls of ashes of the furnace. Everybody say the furnace. Now that's going to be interesting right there. All right. Take full handfuls of ashes of the furnace. It doesn't say a furnace. There's a particular furnace. So I'm going to give you a choice on which one it could be. Okay. And let Moses sprinkle it towards the what? Heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. Okay. And it shall become what? Dust in all. Everybody say dust. It shall become dust. Now page. Next page. Okay, in the land of Egypt, and and shall be a boil breaking forth with what? Blains. Those are blisters. So you're talking about boils and blisters upon man. Can you imagine how cocky Moses probably felt? Going in front of Pharaoh. Yeah, you watching me? Yeah. Going over to the furnace, grabbing the ashes. You know, hey, you see this? Watch this. See this? Huh? See this? One. Threw it towards heaven, the ashes spread out, and as the Egyptians are sitting there, can you imagine Pharaoh's surprise? And all of a sudden, like, what the heck? It got flies on him, mosquitoes, you know, now he's covered with boils and blisters and so forth. Okay? And so these boils breaking forth with blains, everybody say that's blisters and blains, okay? Upon what? Beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So this is happening to the animals as well, okay? So this is against, now you probably heard of this one, this is against the Egyptian goddess Isis. Okay, they used to have a Saturday morning TV show on that, Almighty Isis, okay? Now, this is the goddess of medicine and peace. So God is using the exact opposite of what she's supposed to be a goddess of, medicine. So can you imagine the Egyptians scrambling to get their medicine and so forth, and nothing's working? Goddess of medicine and peace. They have no peace because of all the stuff going on, so they're praying to Isis, Lord, you know, Lord. They're praying to Isis, give us some peace. There's no peace, there's no relief and so forth. Nothing's happening, none of the medicine's working. They're breaking out even more. Okay? So these ashes caused a severe inflammation. Can you imagine walking around just constantly itching? Not just from the lice, but now you've got boils and blisters and everything else. Okay? These things cause fevers. So now everybody's getting sick and so forth. The whole land's corrupted. You can't get a drink of water to refresh or anything. What do? Do you succumb to, drinking blood? You know, I'm sure all the cucumbers and melons and leeks and all that stuff are used up or was corrupted by the flies. Are y'all still with me? All right. So what happened? Well, these boils began to pop up. So now they're swelling up. They're popping on them. Now it's seeping and so forth. Okay? And so this affected both man and beast. Can you imagine trying to sleep? Your clothes are sticking to you. Okay? All this stuff is going to happen again in the tribulation period. Turn to someone and say, I'm glad I won't be here. Yeah, that's right. Okay? Now, I want you to notice where it says, and take to you handfuls of ashes from the furnace. Now, what furnace is this talking about? Okay, number one, in the Hebrew, the word furnace there is kibshan, and it gives the impression that this may be where the word kitchen comes from. Okay, because it's a place where the furnace was held. Now, what furnace was it? Let's see if we can identify it. Turn to somebody and say, inquiring minds want to know. Genesis chapter 19, verse 28. Is it okay if we talk about this? All right. And he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and towards all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, everybody say lo, and smoke of the country went up, went up as the smoke of a furnace. So this is the same Hebrew word for furnace that's used in the book of Exodus. So in this verse, it refers to the smoke of the destruction of Sodom. So the word is not limited to just a smelting furnace, something used to mix chemicals and so forth. So we have one of two possibilities of what the word furnace is number. Okay, so number one, there were two furnaces that could be talking about in Egypt. Number one, it could be talking about the furnace that the Hebrews used to make bricks for the Egyptians. And God could be saying, I want you to take some ashes from the smoke okay, or from the furnace that kept my people enslaved, and we're going to use that to get them free. What does that mean? God is going to use your past, or God is going to use what has entrapped you all your life, and use the same thing against the face of the enemy, turn it around on your behalf so that you can be set free. Are y'all still with me? The second option is that there was a furnace that was dedicated to an Egyptian god called Typhon, okay, who was an evil god who received human sacrifices. So if Moses walked over to the furnace that was dedicated to the Egyptian god, God is literally telling that god to his face, he says, you know, you've required human sacrifices, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice you, and I'm going to reverse the curse and set my people free. Because they weren't killing Egyptians, they were killing the Hebrews. Are you getting this? What does that mean? Well, God has a day of vengeance planned for you, that anybody and everybody in your past who said you couldn't, wouldn't, or shouldn't, God is going to turn the tables on them, and in front of them, He's going to parade you down victory lane when they're going to sit there and be like Golden Power going, golly! Are you getting any of this? All right, so there's no biblical evidence that I could show you which furnace it was, and so this part is simply speculation and so forth. But this god, Typhon, okay, was a very evil god that was worshipped by the Egyptians and so forth, and a lot of human sacrifices are there. And so what God may also be showing is that, okay, you required the blood of my people, and so now I'm turning the curse back onto the people that used to sacrifice my people. Now look, they're bleeding and pussing and everything else everywhere. Okay? Are y'all still with me? Now, what this was also, they used to worship this god Typhon to ward off plagues. Okay? So they wouldn't have locust infestation or anything like that, in case the river Nile flooded, didn't destroy everything. This god was also worshipped to ward off disaster. And so God is literally getting into the face of this god, Typhon, okay, if it's from his furnace, and saying, you know, you're not in charge of these disasters. I come in, I tell the wind where to go, I tell the moon, and I tell the sun when to rise, when to get up. I've got everything scheduled out. I've got everything according to my plan. Everything is held by my word. Everything is done by my word. You know, I don't require a blood sacrifice. As a matter of fact, there's going to come a time when I'm going to send my own son as a sacrifice. Are you seeing any of this? So God is literally, I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. God is literally taking on all these gods and showing them there's not a thing you can do. And so when I'm talking about the battle of the gods, not only was God taking them on one by one, but He was also, you know, as the new plagues arrived, He was still dealing with the old gods and basically shaming them. Now think about this. Can we think about it in a different way? It turns away, he's going to tell me anyways. Here you are. Let's say, well, I don't want to say you are, but let's look into the demonic realm. Let's say that. Okay? So here you are. You're a demon, and you've been boasting to people around. You've been boasting to other demons that you became a god. You got on the status of a god. Okay? Remember, the Bible tells us in the book of Daniel that in the last days, new gods are going to arrive. They're going to come onto the scene. The Bible tells us many times in the Old Testament that as the children of Israel progressed through the nations, they were introduced to new gods. So now you have these fallen angels who are demons and so forth, posing as gods. Now think about the envy that they got amongst fellow demons and fellow angels who didn't become gods. Okay? Now, think about this battle of the gods that's taken place, where they, you know, had the envy of all these other demons and so forth watching them, and now Jehovah God, with one finger, is taking them all on one at a time, or two or three at a time, and not only is He just whooping them one at a time as they come into the ring, but He keeps them whooped as the other ones are approaching. Can you imagine the embarrassment of a demonic horde? See, we don't think they have feelings, but they do. Okay? Demons can create lust. That's a feeling. It's an overdrive, right? So now you have all these demonic entities looking at these powers and these principalities being destroyed by Jehovah God. Can you imagine the mockery that happened in the demonic realm as these other gods began to fall and lose their position? We never think of it that way. But in the book of Colossians, it says that when Jesus defeated the devil on the cross, he says he made an open show of the powers and principalities. An open show means he whooped their butt in front of all of them. Do you remember back in school when you had a good school fight after school? And the one that you thought was going to win got their butt whipped? Huh? Miss Sandra said amen to that. Yeah, I was one of them. Go ahead, Missy, bring it on like Donkey Kong. Okay, so this is what Jesus did also at Calvary. He made an open show. On the third day, he took the keys of death, hell, and the grave. Can you imagine these other demonic powers? Because the scripture says that there's going to come time when everyone's going to look at the devil and they're going to go, it's in the book of Isaiah, he said, is this the one that caused nations to tremble? Can you imagine Jesus whooping the devil that day? And all these demonic hordes are going, ooh, just embarrassing him. Because what you did when you overcame an enemy back in those days, you literally stripped them naked. And you also cut off their thumbs so they couldn't wield the sword against you. Okay? You literally stripped them naked. You put them on a donkey, sometimes riding backwards with a rope around their neck, and you would parade them into your town. That's what he did. And so this is what Jehovah God is doing to all these gods. Come on, bring it on. One at a time. Boom. You know, we say it like this. Whoop, there it is. Whoop, there it is. Can you imagine as the plagues are... Is this making sense to me? As the plagues are progressing, some of these Egyptian gods are now trembling in fear. Oh my... I don't think they went, oh my God, but... Oh me, you know, can you imagine the Egyptian people scrambling to try to find something to sacrifice, hoping that their gods can protect them? And they can't. And so we know for at least 400 years, these gods were in charge because the children of Israel were in slavery for 400 years. So for 400 years, at least, these gods thought they were just, you know, high cotton. Now I've been in Texas too long, man. I mean, they thought they were something else. And then one day, Jehovah God shows up and says, all right, it's time to let my people free. The magicians are scrambling. Pharaoh's looking at the magicians. They can't do anything about it. He has them killed. Because, you know, if you can't perform for the king or for Pharaoh, that sound effect was brought to you free from the Pelizzari sound effect studio. Okay? And so we don't picture the demonic realm or the behind the scenes stuff that's going on, but you've got these demons now in terror. And yet, what amazes me, because this is the way Christianity is, the children of Israel are in the land of Goshen. There's literally a line. Ooh, that didn't, oh, I bet that hurt. Oh, that's nasty. And then God sends a cloud by day so they wouldn't boil in the hot desert sun. He keeps them all in the shade. Okay, probably about 70 degrees. That's the first air conditioning mentioned in the Bible. Hello, somebody. Okay, and then a fire by night. That's the first furnace mentioned in the Bible in that capacity. He keeps them warm from the desert cold. And they went through this 40-year trek watching God supply supernatural. They didn't have any health issues for 40 years. Their clothes grew with them. Their shoes grew with them. What does that mean? Everybody was fashionable. They had all their needs met. And yet, they forgot how God took care of them. And we do the same thing. We got a new crisis and we panic. Here comes another crisis and we panic. We got another crisis and we panic. No different sometimes than like the children of Israel. But aren't you glad that we have His grace and His mercy? Amen. Did you learn something tonight? Give the Lord a hand clap offering if you did. Amen. Are you ready to receive the word tonight? Let's all stand. Let's have some miracle moments. God is watching over His word.